Hey guys, this is DCHL Devin here, and I wanted to give you a new how to play video on the High Elves. This is actually requested by a user on my YouTube videos from an earlier video. And this is an actually pretty interesting army. It's often regarded that High Elves should be one of the most powerful armies in the game, in almost every game, especially when you're talking about, Games Workshop. They tend to overpower High Elves at times. But in this case, this is actually a really well-balanced army, and actually quite hard to play. It has a lot of strengths, but enough weaknesses where it really causes some problems if you play them incorrectly. So let's go ahead and get started. When we talk about High Elves, we first, in Lord of the Rings, have to realize this is kind of two different factions, really. We're talking about Eregion, I believe. I'm probably pronouncing that terribly, but it's a High Elven region in the northwest of Middle-earth, and Rivendell. And then we also have Elrond's household. That's the other faction that is often considered High Elves. It only consists of a cavalry option for the High Elves, as well as another version of Elrond and a little helper that he has, Linder. But still, this should be considered as part of the High Elves, as they fit more with the aesthetics of them than the Wood Elves. Also, since the Rivendell force is the main part of the High Elves, we have to say that the Elrond's household makes sense to be part of that. Now, when we talk about the High Elves, we really have to mention that they have some of the most powerful heroes in the game. They easily can beat most any hero in the evil side and the good side, to be fair. With Gil-galad and Elrond leading the charge with that, Gil-galad has the highest fight value in the game amongst most units other than a Balrog, and he actually has a pretty powerful hit considering it's +1 to wound for everything. Also, you got Elrond, who can cast one of the most powerful spells in the game, Wrath of Breenan, and also his ability to might priority rolls, which is only unique to him. He actually has a special section called Fortune in order to do this. Also, you have really powerful combat heroes, such as the twins, who further point costs really give you a lot of might and a lot of combat abilities. Then you have Glorfindel, Lord of the West. I mean, he is probably one of the most feared elves in the game. Aristor, I mean, just plenty of really great combat options. Even on the spellcasting side, you have Gildor and Glorian, you have the High Elf Stormcallers are actually pretty decent. Sirdan, not shown here, can cast a plethora of little spells for you. I mean, you're talking about half the heroes in your army can actually cast spells, Arwen and such like that. So you really have a lot of options when it comes to the hero. Another thing we have to mention is the really powerful stat lines in this army. You have high fight, in fact the highest in the game. If you field Gil-galad, you can actually even boost the average fight of your warriors to fight 6, which means you're almost never going to lose a fight if you roll enough dice. Also, you have high defense in this army. Unlike most elven armies, which actually have weak defense and is actually known as a staple for elves, this army actually has defense 5 starting off and can get to defense 6 without a problem. Most of its heroes also wear a lot of armor and can get to defense 7 pretty easily. Also, lastly, their courage is amazing. You're never going anywhere with this army. Their courage is never failing. Courage 5 is the lowest you'll ever get, and to fail that is hard enough, let alone the fact that these guys can easily boost their courage without an issue and even cast spells that will allow them to pass courage automatically. Also, their cav models are actually pretty decent. As far as stat lines go, you have some horse models that actually can move 12 inches within their army, so they have quite a bit of stat lines that really are worth mentioning. I have to touch once again on the magic. The reason for this is because you pretty much have all the magical spells available to good armies. You have actually Call Wind, Strengthen Will, Nature's Wrath, Immobilize, Are of Dismay, Command, Are of Command, Wrath of Breenan, and even spells that you really can't get from other armies. You also have the ability to resist magic with Linder, whom is Elrond's special helper, I guess we can say. He actually can allow you to resist magic pretty easily in your army. So you really have a lot of magical options with this army, and it's probably one of the key ways to play this army. You really don't want to go into combat too often without it, unless you really have a strategy that is all completely just heavy combat hero oriented. Also, while speaking about those auras, we also have to mention that your Stormcaller actually is one of the only models in the the game besides Gandalf who can actually bring back the will of a model. Now, I know Bomber can do it and others and such, but this model actually has a spell that can do it, which is always nice to have the longer range. And what that allows you to do is to bring back the auras cast by heroes who run out of will. So Ringwraiths actually will have a problem bringing down your auras, unlike almost any other army. So this is always something that's really good to mention. Lastly, when we're talking about strengths of the High Elves, we also have to mention, because they are elves, they all have woodland creatures. So difficult terrain is not a problem for you. Now, as far as the weaknesses for High Elves go, there's really kind of few, but unfortunately those few weaknesses really make a big difference on how hard this army is to play at times. Number one, low numbers. I mean, this is the number one weakness in High Elves. In fact, you can expect this to be a problem more in this army than pretty much any other army in the game. With the High Elves, if the force you're just looking at right now, just this one warband is 250 points. So, I mean, if you're talking about a 700-point game, you're probably only getting 1 or 2 more warbands at best. And that's if you don't get banners or anything complicated, or even strong heroes like Elrond or Gil-galad. So, I mean, you're really going to have a lot of problems fielding a larger force in this type of army. Also, you have very few troop options. This troop that you see here is pretty much it. And it's kind of a problem that you'll see in the army. It makes it kind of, I guess you could say, boring to play at times if you're not playing all the fun heroes, because you just have one guy. Now, you can arm these guys up with shields, and you can arm them up with bows, which I guess makes some interesting options. And of course, as I mentioned, Elrond's households is considered part of the High Elves, so you do have a cav option. There's just one. But that's it. You have 2 troop options, really at best, 4 if you really arm them with all kinds of different stuff. And that's all you have. So it's kind of an army where you really have to adapt based on one troop choice. You don't have a troop that handles this or a troop that handles that. You get this, and this is what you have to work with no matter whom you fight. So luckily, your troops are some of the best in the game, but still, if you're inexperienced with actual tactics, you're going to have a problem using this army. Lastly, their cavalry options that I just mentioned are really expensive. Fielding an entire warband of them is almost completely unreasonable, and you just certainly wouldn't do it. Also, as far as shooting, yes, you do have it, but with the large expense of this army, remember that this army follows a 33% rule. So unlike Wood Elves, who can spam lots and lots of bows because they're so cheap comparatively, this army, you're really not going to get too many, and unfortunately you can't rely on shooting too often. So you're going to have to dig into close combat, which leads to the last weakness of this army, low strength. Now, this gets kind of supplemented a little bit in the fact that these guys wield two-handed weapons quite often, but you are fighting with a Strength 3 army, and you have to remember that when you're going up against Defense 6 units. It will take you a really long time to beat through them if you're not using your two-handed weapons. Your heroes can, crush through the enemies quite a bit faster. This army plays a little bit like Gondor in its ability, the fact that, yeah, your men hold the front line, your heroes pretty much crush through. So, I mean, you can do it just that way, but if you want to use warriors, you're pretty much only stuck with one option, which is two-handed weapons. So now that we know the strengths and weaknesses of this army, we're really going to have to get into how to play them. This army is actually quite complicated in a weird way. The fact that, yes, as I mentioned, you have little troop options. Now, you're going to want to definitely take two-handed weapons. When you're fighting against a Defense 6 army, this is all you've got. Now, also, you're going to want spears in the back. Now, I don't know, I'm not showing them here, but they are capable of being armed with spears. You want as many supports as possible. So you could actually give the elven archers in the back spears and use them to fire through ranks until the enemy comes to you. Also, this leads to banners. Now, some would argue that banners take too many troops out of your slots. I mean, in the fact that they are kind of expensive, especially with high elves. A banner is about 3 high elves worth in price, but I still vouch for their usefulness. The ability to reroll fights is really important, especially when you have the ability to win every single tie. So this is really something I personally would recommend, and you'd see a lot of high elf players do it. If you choose not to, you're relying on only 2 attacks. You can't have pikes, you can't have anything else, and remember, you're not going to swarm them very much. So yeah, your high fight's great and all, but you're starting to rely on luck, which is something you don't want to have during a game too often, especially when we're already rolling dice. So Another thing you want to remember is to always feint with your front row. Remember that your high elves won't lose their fight value if your back rank is fighting through, so you won't have a problem with that at all. Also, this leads to the point of if you do decide to upgrade your high elves to Kingsguard, only upgrade the back ranks. The reason for this is because the back ranks will push their fight value to the front ranks, and they're unlikely to be separated really, so you only really need to spend the cost on the back rank alone. The front rank can use your swords that can feint as well as do a two-handed strike. That way you can re-roll ones and get +1 to your roll. So that's actually a pretty surefire way where you know you're going to end up destroying the enemy. With the banner in there as well, you should do pretty well with this. Now this means that you're not going to get shields in the front rank. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. Personally, you'll see a lot of armies without shields, a lot of high elf armies without shields. Defense 5 can get you kind of where you need to go, just strictly on the fact that with the banner and a support, with 3 dice rolling in, you're pretty much not going to lose the fight very often anyway, so you don't have too much to worry about on dying. Especially in close combat. However, there are some versions of this army where you can field a front line of shields. You just lose the two-handed weapon strikes, which make it really problematic against Defense 6. Another thing I'd highly recommend is the Nature's Wrath spell. Now, as you see, Elrond's in the back. You can use him or Arwen and cast Nature's Wrath and knock down all the opposing models. I'd highly recommend this. Remember, you are low in numbers. If you have Arwen in your force, that's great. You should use this, and then instead of using two-handed weapon strikes, let's say you wanted to use a shield wall in the front instead, now you get to double all your dice because models on the ground are going to end up becoming trapped. So this is a great way to defeat the enemy if you already haven't. Also, even if you're using the two-handed weapon version, doubling up your dice, re-rolling ones, and all of that is just awesome. Plus, then you don't have to worry about your defense 5 because if they win the fight, they can't even strike anymore. Another thing I'd kind of recommend is Hour of Dismay. Hour of Dismay is an ability for Círdan, and not many people are too popular, they don't like him too much. But honestly, I'd say that Círdan is worth it for his terror if you have a high enough point limit. I really think that most of your points on heroes should be spent on more of your combat-oriented heroes or heroes that can do more. But the fact that he can grant terror to your entire army is something worth mentioning on the fact that, yes, you have small numbers, you probably don't want to be overwhelmed way too much. Also, if you happen to take a Stormcaller, one spell you can cast is Call Winds. Call Winds seems kind of arbitrary at first. You just push them back like 12 inches. Well, not 12, but it's a pretty far distance back. But the more to the point about it is it knocks the opponent down. So you're knocking down, like, say, a monster or anything else. It's a very easy casting roll. If you knock them down, then your cavalry can come in and slam into them with their lances. Lances are great since they don't take away that -1. They don't give you -1 in your roll to fight. So if you're going to use Lancers in your force, I'd put them at priority targets that are going to be really hard to bring down, but you really want to knock them down first. With so few Lancers in your list, the last thing you want is a really unlucky roll, and the enemy just pretty much pummels your cavalry, or even worse, if you send them at a monster, they start throwing you around. You really want to keep those guys on the ground. So as an alternative to Arwen casting Nature's Wrath or Elrond casting Wrath of Bruinen, you can just simply cast this spell quite often. The Call Wind spell. Also, stay together if possible. You don't want to be piecemealed with this army. By piecemealing, I mean if your opponent manages to get you all split up, like they manage to fight you with basically fight a piece of your army. Actually, if you want a great example of this, you can actually see the Bat Rep, DCHL Tim actually managed to beat Richmond Warmancer Joel in a fight just simply because he managed to piecemeal him and because the army wasn't together enough. So definitely stay together. You don't want to split up if possible. Obviously, in games like Hold Ground or Domination, it's going to be a little impossible to do that. But where you can stay together, you should. Also, I wouldn't recommend too much bowfire. I mentioned this earlier. Bowfire is kind of a problem in this army because you're not going to get very much of it. And you can see a lot of strength 3 bows in other armies. I still would invest. I certainly wouldn't mind seeing, saying, okay, back ranks should get bows, and have maybe a spear with it. I think this is actually a good combo, but you just shouldn't have like every warband be half bows. I think after so many bows, you're going to start to realize it's taking away from things that could have helped you a little bit more. So That's pretty much how I would play this army. That's how you'll see a lot of tournament players play this army. But I want you guys to tell me what you think. How would you play this army? What do you think that I missed, and or what do you think I'm wrong about? Let me know in the comment section below. Hey guys, welcome to the how to buy portion of this video. And in this section, I'm going to try to tell you how you can buy this force for under $100. And the good news is with High Elves, it's really easy. Now, as I said before, this army is really small, and the smaller the army is, the less you need to buy. The only weird complication with this army is the fact that when you try to buy them, you actually can't buy any of the actual models for the army. The reason why is because the Last Alliance box, which is what most of your models are in, actually gives you about 4 Numenorians as well, along with the 8 Elves that it gives you. So you end up wasting some money on some units you're probably not going to use, especially if you don't intend to do a Last Alliance theme. So the actual better units to buy is the Galadrim Warrior Pack. It gives you a full warband of 12 elves and gives you spear options as well. That's the other problem with the Last Alliance box. It only gives you one pose of one weapon type, and it also gives you bows, yes, but you're still getting the same static pose every single time. Yes, it is reminiscent of the Last Alliance scene. It looks just like it, but you still have to, want some dynamic poses when you have them all scattered in combat. So the Galadrim Warriors, I think, fill this really well. Also, they give you shields and everything as mentioned before. So they're exactly the same price for both boxes, so you just get more for your money. Yes, technically your force will look like a Galadrim force, but I imagine you could paint them a little differently, as you saw my High Elves earlier in the video, and make them look kind of unique without that old Galadrim feel that you see from the movies. Another thing is the Galadrim Knights versus the Knights of Rivendell. Now, obviously, we're still sticking with Galadrim. I mean, their armor patterns look very similar, so it's easy to gravitate toward them. The Galadrim Knights don't have lances like the Rivendell Knights do, but you do save $13 just getting the Galadrim Knights instead, so it is a bit of a tempting buy. However, the Knights of Rivendell are still worth it only in the fact that you're probably only ever going to need 6 of them. Fielding an entire warband of these things is ridiculous. I certainly wouldn't do it. So once you buy one box, you're actually done. So I still would recommend the Knights of Rivendell despite their high cost in money. Now, as far as heroes are concerned, this is where it actually works out pretty well. My recommendation, I would say, if you can shell out the extra $4, the Armored Glorfindel and Armored Eregion, and you'll hear what I mean by the $4 in a second. The Armored Glorfindel and Armored Eregion look like the twins. So Eladon and Elrohir here, if you get their box, they are $20, but Armored Glorfindel is $12, Armored Eregion is $12. So if you, like I said, $4 more, you actually get an armored version, which you probably would end up using in your games. And they really look like the twins. The best part about that is you can double them up as anything. You can double them up as Glorfindel, Eregion. I've actually seen some people decide to use them as even Elrond. Glorfindel's pose is exactly the same as, well, not exactly, but very similar to Elrond's pose. But another box I still would recommend is Elrond and Glorfindel. Elrond and Gil-galad. They're $30, so they're a bit more, but they still are very unique looking models that you can easily buy. But these are heroes that I'd say are worth it. The Elven Command Pack is $15 for 2. Not bad. Considering, but I mean, still at the same time, I mean, I'd like to compare them to the new command packs. Those new command packs are about $40, so 2 elf commands here are only $30 when you buy 2 of them. So you're really getting kind of a better deal with these. Although if you want the Stormcaller, you're still going to need to do the Elf Command as well. So you're not really going to be able to skip out on that. If you want to make a list, I'd say 2 Galadrim boxes, which will give you 24 elves. That is probably more than enough for what you're going to need. And then you can do a, let's say, Elrond and Gil-galad for $30, and Eladon and Elrohir, which is the other 2. So you get 4 heroes, very strong heroes, and you get enough troops to really fill any type of need you want. If you want to mix that up a little bit, you could do a High Elf Command instead of Eladon and Elrohir. That's often perfectly acceptable. You get that banner that I often said that you probably would want. Or instead of Elrond and Gil-galad, you can get 2 High Elf Command boxes and get 2 banners for your 2 war bands of units. And then just get Eladon and Elrohir on the side. Any of those heroes would be a good mix, because the best part is your heroes are so expensive points-wise that you can pretty much fill any point-size game that you want. Pretty much below But as long as it doesn't get above 700 points, which as a beginner who's just buying the army for the first time, I wouldn't recommend playing that high anyway. Other than that, it's an easy fill for knights if you want to get more points in there. But yeah, this is pretty much the only way to really say how to play this race. The real problem with it is that you only have 2 troop choices, so there's not really much to talk about here. Just buy the Galadrim packs and mix it up. The only thing I would say to stay away from is the Last Alliance Spearmen. These models are really expensive at $26 for 4 of them, so stay away from those. I'd say even if you're not on a budget, I still think the Galadrim Warriors are a better bet. So hopefully if you guys have any questions about this, or actually anything that you've thought of that might make it a little easier to buy these guys, let me know in the comments section below. I'm always here to discuss. Thanks for watching.